Good morning, everyone. Hello. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Jens. Good morning, Bante. Apparently, there was a little bit of a hiccup on the listing of the event, so hopefully people um, understood that it was at 8 a.m. Definitely a few of you have. For whatever reason, we just saw that on the YouTube event, it said 2:25 instead of 8 a.m. Sutta study is always at 8 a.m. So hopefully other people will join us as well. All right. Bante, should we start?
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this morning we're looking at the Bāhitika Sutta, which is in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 88, translated here as the cloak. So, as usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give some explanations, and you can type in questions at any time, and I'll answer them at the end of the session. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park. Then in the morning, Venerable Ananda dressed, took his bowl and robe, and entered Savatthi for alms. After going for alms in Savatthi, when he had finished his meal and returned from alms round, he went to the mansion of Megara's mother in the eastern park for the day's abiding. On that occasion, King Pasenadi of Kosala had mounted the elephant Ekapundarika and set out from Savatthi for the day. King Pasenadi of Kosala saw Venerable Ananda coming in the distance and said to his minister Sirivadda, "Dear Sirivadda, that is Venerable Ananda." Then King Pasenadi of Kosala said to a certain man, "Good man, go to Venerable Ananda, honor him with your head at his feet, and address him with my words. Bante, King Pasenadi of Kosala honors you with his head at your feet. Then say, Bante, if there is nothing that Venerable Ananda urgently needs to do, then, Bante, let Venerable Ananda wait a moment out of compassion." So, just a little bit of background here. So King Pasenadi was the king of one of the small countries of northern India. So at the time, northern India was composed of many, many small kingdoms. Traditionally, people say that there were, I think, 18 small countries in northern India at the time, but actually there were probably more than that. And one of them was the kingdom of Kosala. And so Kosala was in the area where the Buddha would often go and teach. And the king of Kosala, King Pasenadi, was a very devout follower of the Buddha. So he was a very devout practitioner of Buddhism. And he had very deep respect for the Buddhist monastics. So, yes, Lord, that man replied to King Pasenadi of Kosala. Minor fun thing, by the way. So the person actually refers to the king as Deva. So, yes, Deva, that man replied to King Pasenadi of Kosala. He approached Venerable Ananda, paid respects to him, and stood to one side. While he was standing to one side, he said to Venerable Ananda, "Bante, King Pasenadi of Kosala honors you with his head at your feet and says this, Bante, if there is nothing that Venerable Ananda urgently needs to do, then, Bante, let Venerable Ananda wait a moment out of compassion." Venerable Ananda silently consented. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala, having gone as far as he could by elephant, dismounted from the elephant and approached Venerable Ananda on foot. He paid respects to Venerable Ananda and stood to one side. While he was standing to one side, King Pasenadi of Kosala said to Venerable Ananda, "Bante, if there is nothing that Venerable Ananda urgently needs to do, Then, Bhante, it would be excellent if Venerable Ananda would approach the bank of the river Achiravati out of compassion. Venerable Ananda silently consented. In other words, the king invited him to go and sit by the river with him. Then Venerable Ananda approached the bank of the river Achiravati and sat at a seat prepared at the base of a certain tree. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala, after going as far as he could by elephant, dismounted from the elephant and approached Venerable Ananda on foot. He paid respects to Venerable Ananda and stood to one side. While he was standing to one side, King Pasenadi of Kosala said to Venerable Ananda, "Here, Bhante, let Venerable Ananda sit on this elephant hide rug." And Ananda replies, "Enough, great king. You sit on it. I am already seated on my own sitting cloth." So this is one of the standard pieces of Buddhist monks' traditional equipment is a sitting cloth. So a square or rectangular piece of fabric that one carries around so that you can sit on the ground without getting your robes dirty. King Pasenadi had one made out of elephant hide, which was a relatively luxurious item. Most people wouldn't have had a sitting cloth made out of elephant hide. So him offering a luxurious item for Venerable Ananda to use, and that's very sweet and kind, but a Buddhist monk will often refuse, especially in the suttas. We see this in a number of places where people try to get the monks to use luxury items, and the monks would refuse, because you don't need something really fancy and luxurious. You just need something functional. You just need something that works. So Ananda was like, "Well, I'm already sitting on my own sitting cloth. I don't need to sit on this fancy elephant rug that you carry around." So then King Pasenadi of Kosala sat on the prepared seat. When he was seated, he said to Venerable Ananda, "Bhante Ananda, would the Blessed One engage in any kind of physical activity, verbal activity, or mental activity that would be criticized by contemplatives and Brahmins?" So I should clarify here, by the way, that the word Brahmin, as used in the Buddhist texts, has two different meanings. So one is the use that we're more familiar with these days. So referring to the hereditary caste of priests that we find in Hinduism. And the other use of the word Brahmin is any holy person, any person who is living a spiritual life. And in particular, anyone who has made substantial progress in spiritual practice. So in the suttas, Buddhist monastics are commonly referred to as Brahmins, not because of anything to do with Hinduism or anything to do with the caste system, but because they have practiced a spiritual life and made substantial progress in that spiritual practice. So the phrase contemplatives and Brahmins, which in Pali, samana brahmana, is commonly used just as a general statement meaning spiritual practitioners of all sorts. So it's kind of a blanket statement that refers to all people who are sincerely committed to spiritual practice of any kind. So it doesn't necessarily, once again, it doesn't necessarily refer to the hereditary priest caste in Hinduism, as we usually think these days, but rather it's more of a blanket term for spiritual practitioners. And the Buddha replied, Venerable Ananda replies, so speaking about the Buddha, he says, "Great King, the Blessed One would not engage in any kind of physical, verbal, or mental activity that would be criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins." So notice there's a subtle difference between the question the king asks and the answer that Ananda gives. So the king asks, would the Buddha do anything that would be criticized by contemplatives and Brahmins? And Venerable Ananda replies, the Buddha would not do anything that would be criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins. Because there's lots of foolish ones, and they'll criticize all kinds of things, which may or may not be valid criticism. But wise practitioners would not criticize what the Buddha does, because there's nothing blameworthy in what the Buddha does. There's nothing blameworthy in what he says. There's nothing blameworthy in what he thinks. So then the king replies, "Wonderful, Bhante, magnificent Bhante. Bhante, we were not able to answer this question that has been completely explained by Venerable Ananda. Bhante, those who are foolish and incompetent speak in praise or dispraise of others without investigating and considering, and we do not see that as valuable. However, Bhante, the wise, competent, and sagacious speak in praise or dispraise of others after investigating and considering, and we do see that as valuable." So here the king is, he's apparently caught the little distinction that Ananda was making, that little subtle distinction that the Buddha would not be criticized by wise spiritual practitioners. And again, the king here is pointing out, yes, those who are foolish praise or dispraise without deep, careful investigation and consideration. But the wise carefully investigate and consider before either approving or disapproving of something. So then the king asks, "Bhante Ananda, what kind of physical, verbal, and mental activity is criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins?" And Ananda replies, "Great king, any physical, verbal, or mental activity that is unwholesome." So the Pali word here is akusala. So kusala, commonly translated as wholesome. Sometimes it's translated as skillful. And occasionally in the suttas, we see the word kusala used to mean skillful in a more ordinary way, like someone who is a skillful carpenter or a skillful painter. Then we would also use the word kusala to mean skillful in that way. But usually, most of the time in the suttas, the word kusala means spiritually skillful. So skillful at developing good, wholesome spiritual qualities. So then kusala is commonly translated as wholesome, because it's not just skillful in the ordinary way. Like someone could be a skillful assassin, but that would not be wholesome. So normally when we talk about kusala, it carries this moral connotation of someone who is morally skillful, spiritually skillful, not just skillful in the ordinary sense. So for this reason, the translation wholesome is very useful because it emphasizes the moral component of this word kusala. So then the king asks, "Bhante, what physical, verbal, and mental activity is unwholesome?" And Ananda replies, "Great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that is blameworthy." The king says, "Bhante, what physical, verbal, and mental activity is blameworthy?" Ananda replies, "Great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that is afflictive." So anything that brings affliction, anything that causes harm. And the king asks, "Bhante, what physical, verbal, and mental activity is afflictive?" Great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that results in dukkha. And he asks, "Bhante, what physical, verbal, and mental activity results in suffering?" And he replies, "Great king, any physical, verbal, or mental activity that contributes to affliction for oneself, that contributes to affliction for others, such as denying medical care, that contributes to affliction for both, that causes unwholesome mind states to increase, or that causes wholesome mind states to decrease. Great King, this is the kind of physical, verbal, and mental activity that is criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins. So this is the first section here. So I'll speak a little bit about this. So here, Venerable Ananda is going through a sequence of how we can determine what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. So he says, we know that something is unwholesome if it is blameworthy. And we know that something is blameworthy if it causes affliction. And we know that something causes affliction if it results in dukkha, if it results in suffering. And anything which causes affliction for ourselves, for others, or for both, anything that causes unwholesome mind states to increase, or that causes wholesome mind states to decrease, that is what we know causes suffering, is afflictive, is blameworthy, and therefore is unwholesome. So this is what is criticized by wise spiritual practitioners. So notice here once again that, as I mentioned several times over the last few days, what's being emphasized here is not just looking after yourself, but also looking after others. So not doing anything that contributes to pain, misery, or suffering for yourself, and also not doing anything that contributes to pain, misery, and suffering for others, not doing anything that contributes to pain, misery, and affliction for any living being. So here, once again, we see the Buddha emphasizing that we practice not just for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of others. And we practice not just for the benefit of others, but for the benefit of both ourselves and others. So not making any distinction between self and other. So not putting ourselves either below or above others. Not putting ourselves either above or below others. And also he speaks about watching to see what is it that causes unwholesome mind states to increase, or what causes wholesome mind states to decrease. So when we engage in any kind of activity that strengthens our desires, that strengthens our aversion, that builds up our self-centeredness, that increases our confusion, our ignorance, our delusion, well, then that's to be avoided. That's something which is criticized by wise spiritual practitioners because it leads to affliction, both for ourselves and for others. And similarly, anything which causes our wholesome states to decrease. So anything that causes our loving kindness to diminish, anything that causes our compassion to weaken, anything that reduces our mindfulness, anything that weakens our equanimity, anything that hinders our samadhi. These are all things that are criticized by wise practitioners and therefore are best avoided. So then the king asks another question. He asks, Bhante Ananda, does the Blessed One praise abandoning all unwholesome mind states? And the Buddha replies, Venerable Ananda replies, so speaking about the Buddha, he says, Great King, the Tathagata has abandoned all unwholesome mind states and is endowed with all wholesome mind states. So I find this very interesting because he actually did not directly answer the king's question. So the king asked, does the Blessed One praise, like speak in praise of, abandoning all unwholesome mind states? So the word here is vanneti, so translated as praise. It literally means to make beautiful, or to glorify, to make something sound wonderful, to make something sound beautiful. So the implication here is, does the Buddha make wholesome things sound beautiful? Does he glorify it? So is the implication of elevating something beyond its actual status. There's the implication of making something appear more than it is. Kind of like when you have a place which is actually not a very nice place to visit, but they want to increase their tourism income. So then they start putting out ads in other countries saying how wonderful the place is and how beautiful it is and how much fun it is to try to get more people to go there. So similarly, this is vanneti. So making something sound beautiful, making something sound attractive. So the king is asking, does the Buddha make wholesome things sound attractive? And Ananda just replies, the Buddha has abandoned, or the king asks, does the Buddha make abandoning unwholesome things sound attractive? Is he glorifying or beautifying the abandoning of unwholesome states? And Ananda simply replies, the Buddha has abandoned all unwholesome mind states, and he's developed all wholesome mind states. So in other words, he's saying the Buddha's actions speak for themselves. You don't need to question what the Buddha is teaching. You just look at what he does. Look at what he does. Look at how he acts. The Buddha doesn't need to try to glorify or beautify anything, because his actions speak for themselves. He's purified his own mind. There's nothing blameworthy to be found in him. Again, there's no need for him to glorify the abandoning of unwholesome mind states. The mere fact that he's done it is already an indication that this is something important. Because the abandoning of unwholesome mind states is the defining characteristic of a fully awakened being. So similarly, if we want to be fully awakened, then we should try to be following in the same footsteps. And also, again, cultivating all wholesome mind states. So this means caring about and cherishing all sentient beings, caring about and cherishing all living beings. So not making these distinctions of rich people are better than poor people, or fully abled people are more valuable than disabled people, or any of that, but rather cherishing and valuing all life, cherishing and valuing all living beings, all sentient beings, and always doing what we can to be of benefit, always doing what we can to support and nourish and sustain living beings. Never doing anything to harm, and never withholding aid and support from those who need it. So then the king asks Bhante Ananda, he asks him, Bhante Ananda, what physical, verbal, and mental activity is not criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins? Great king, any physical, verbal, or mental activity that is wholesome. And what is wholesome? He replies, great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that is blameless. What is blameless? Great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that is non-afflictive. What is non-afflictive? Great king, any physical, verbal, and mental activity that results in happiness. Bhante, what physical, verbal, and mental activity results in happiness? And he replies, great king, any physical, verbal, or mental activity that does not contribute to affliction for oneself, that does not contribute to affliction for others, that does not contribute to affliction for both, that causes unwholesome mind states to decrease, and that causes wholesome mind states to increase. Great king, this is the kind of physical, verbal, and mental activity that is not criticized by wise contemplatives and Brahmins. So here, again, this talk about happiness, about an aspect of our practice. So what Venerable Ananda is pointing out here is that when we try to develop our practice, then naturally we experience happiness. And in fact, this is one of the ways of discerning what is wholesome, is that wholesome mind states are pleasant. Unwholesome mind states are unpleasant. It's a very basic test that we can do. For example, when the mind is full of resentment, irritation, hostility, aversion, is that pleasant or unpleasant? No, it's unpleasant. When the mind is filled with loving kindness, compassion, and benevolence, is that pleasant or unpleasant? It's pleasant. So there's very simple judgment that we can make. When the mind is filled with agitation, it's unpleasant. When the mind is filled with serenity, it's pleasant. So these basic evaluations give us some sense as to what's wholesome and unwholesome. And also reflecting that when we don't harm anyone, when we refrain from harming ourselves or others, then we're happy. And when we cause harm to ourselves or others, then we're unhappy. It makes us miserable. So it's this basic reflection of recognizing that the practice of cultivating wholesome qualities and abandoning unwholesome qualities is inherently pleasant and joyful. It brings happiness. Sometimes it does mean facing difficult situations, such as our own mind, looking at unpleasant and challenging things, such as our own mind. But by doing so, one, we're acknowledging what's there anyway. But by facing it and acknowledging it, then we're able to come to serenity. We're able to come to acceptance and contentment. And we're able to see what we can do in order to improve the situation. So it still results in happiness. It's kind of like if you're terribly sick, but you pretend that you're healthy and therefore you don't go to the doctor, then you won't get the treatment that you need. Like so many people in Italy, where there's not enough doctors and not enough hospitals anymore. So many people, they can't get the treatment that they need. So they just get worse. So it's the same. If we just pretend that there's nothing wrong with our mind, then it just gets worse. And we just suffer more and more as much as we try to pretend that everything's okay. It's not okay. But when we acknowledge, yes, I'm sick, I need to go to the doctor, and we go to the doctor, then we can get the treatment that we need in order to start getting better. Well, it's the same. When we look at our mind and we admit, I'm sick, my mind is filled with all kinds of harmful, unwholesome patterns and tendencies. This is not good. Then once we acknowledge it, then we can start applying the treatment. We can start practicing the Dhamma to overcome our afflictions. And when we do that, then we get better. We get happier. There's more joy and contentment that we experience. So then the king asks, Bhante Ananda, does the Blessed One praise commitment to all wholesome things? So similarly to his earlier question, does the Blessed One praise abandoning all unwholesome things? He asks here, does the Blessed One praise commitment to all wholesome things? So the word that's translated here as commitment, by the way, in Pali is upasampada, which is, comes from three parts. Its etymology has three parts. Upa, which means close or near. Sang, which means together or complete. And pad, which means to reach or to arrive at. So to completely, thoroughly arrive at is what upasampada means. So completely, thoroughly developing or attaining or arriving at all wholesome things. And upasampada, by the way, is also the word that we use to refer to ordination. So when somebody becomes a Buddhist monastic, that's called upasampada. So it's that same implication of entering a higher order of existence, a higher status of practice. So again, he asked, does the Buddha praise commitment to all wholesome things? And Ananda replies, Great King, the Tathagata has abandoned all unwholesome mind states and is endowed with all wholesome mind states. This is the same statement that he made earlier. So again, emphasizing that the Buddha doesn't need to try to glorify anything in particular. He's just done it. And having done it, he knows what's wholesome and he knows what's unwholesome. Having done it, he knows what's valuable and he knows what's harmful. And knowing what's valuable and what's harmful, he speaks about what's valuable as valuable. And what's valuable, by the way, is not the accumulation of wealth or the accumulation of capital or the accumulation of fame. What's valuable is the accumulation of wholesome mind states. What's valuable is the cultivation of kindness, compassion, and wisdom. And the Buddha knows what's harmful. He knows that greed, stinginess, withholding, self-centeredness, he knows that these are harmful. And so knowing what's helpful and knowing what's harmful, he speaks about it. So there's no glorification of anything. He just speaks about what's naturally glorious, which is the cultivation of wholesome mind states and the abandoning of unwholesome mind states. So then the king replies, wonderful Bhante, magnificent Bhante. Bhante, this has been well said by Venerable Ananda. Bhante, we are satisfied and pleased with Venerable Ananda's well-spoken statement. Bhante, because we are satisfied and pleased with Venerable Ananda's well-spoken statement, if it was proper for Venerable Ananda to have a prize elephant, we would give him a prize elephant. If it was proper for Venerable Ananda to have a prize horse, we would give him a prize horse. If it was proper for Venerable Ananda to have control of a village, we would give him control of a village. However, Bhante, we know that these things are not proper for Venerable Ananda. So these are all things that Buddhist monastics are not supposed to own. We're not supposed to own elephants and horses in villages. So it would in fact be quite improper to give Ananda those things. However, he says, Bhante, I have this cloak, which was sent to me by King Ajatasattu Vedehiputta of Magadha, wrapped in a roll of cloth. It is 16 units long and 8 units wide. Bhante, let Venerable Ananda receive it out of compassion. In other words, he has this fancy cloak that was given to him by another king. So this was probably a really, really nice cloak. Like not just some tattered piece of stained cloth, which is what Buddhist monks at that time normally would wear. But Ananda says, enough, great king, I already have a complete set of 3 robes. In other words, Ananda's like, I don't need your fancy cloak, I already have enough robes, I don't need anything else. So similarly, he's emphasizing here contentment. So Ananda is saying like, I don't need these things, I have enough to get by. So this is another major element of Buddhist practice, is the practice of contentment. We don't need fancy things. We just need enough to get by. We don't need to hoard and stockpile a bunch of extra luxuries. We just need enough to get by. We just need to cover our basic needs. And in fact, the more fancy, luxurious stuff we accumulate, the less happy we are. So one of my favorite quotes from the world of pop culture is from the movie Fight Club. In that movie, at one point, it says, the things you own end up owning you. So similarly, the more stuff we accumulate, and especially the more fancy, luxurious, expensive things we accumulate, the less happy we are. It's just a way of trying to cover up that deep sense of hollowness within us, trying to cover up that fundamental lack of contentment. But actually, if we have enough and we're content with having enough, then we're fine. There's no problem. However, the king wants to give him the cloak, so the king persists. He says, Bhante, the river Achiravati is seen by both Venerable Ananda and by us. So they're sitting on the banks of the river, remember, and they're looking at the river. So the king says, we both see the river. When a great rain cloud pours high in the mountains, then the river Achiravati overflows both its banks. In the same way, Bhante, with this cloak, Venerable Ananda can make a set of 3 robes for himself, and whatever cloth is left over from making Venerable Ananda's set of 3 robes can be shared with his spiritual companions. In this way, our donation will metaphorically overflow. Bhante, let Venerable Ananda receive this cloak. So Venerable Ananda received the cloak. In other words, what the king is saying is, by giving you this cloak, not only will you have enough to make robes for yourself, but you can also share it with your other companions. So Venerable Ananda received the cloak, and the implication here is that he received it because then he would be able to share it with his companions. He would be able to share it with the other monks. So this also is emphasizing the importance of compassion, of generosity, of sharing what we have with our fellow companions. And again, emphasizing that earlier the king had asked him, please receive it out of compassion. So this also is another aspect of compassion, is that when somebody else wants to do something kind for us, it is compassionate to allow them. Of course, we need to be practical. But generally speaking, if somebody wants to do an act of kindness or generosity towards us, then we should try to find a way to allow them to do that, because this is a way of encouraging their wholesome qualities and allowing them to make merit, allowing them to make good karma. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala said to Venerable Ananda, Bhante Ananda, now we will go. We have many duties and much to do. Ananda replies, Great King, do as you see fit. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala, having delighted in Venerable Ananda's statement, rose from his seat, paid respects to Venerable Ananda, and having done what was respectful, he left. Then not long after King Pasenadi of Kosala had left, Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. While he was seated to one side, Venerable Ananda reported to the Blessed One the entire conversation that had occurred with King Pasenadi of Kosala, and gave the cloak to the Blessed One. Then the Blessed One announced to the monks, Monks, it is a gain for King Pasenadi of Kosala. It is well gained by King Pasenadi of Kosala that he got to see Ananda and attend to him. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the Blessed One's statement. So this I also find adorable. So Ananda gets given this fancy cloak, and the first thing he does is he goes and he gives it to the Buddha. So rather than hoarding it for himself, like, yes, I've got this fancy cloak, it's all mine. Instead, he gives it to another monk, and not just any monk, he gives it to the Buddha. But still, it indicates that there was, when he received something that he didn't really need, the first thing he did was to think, who can I give this to? And he gave it to one of his spiritual companions, and not just anyone. Of course, he had a Buddha that he could give it to. These days, we don't have Buddhas to give things to. But still, whenever we have anything beyond our basic needs, we can ask ourselves, who can I give this to? Who would this benefit? Who would appreciate this? So rather than thinking, how can I stockpile more things for myself? Instead, we can think, what can I give to others? What can I share with others? So we almost always have more than we need. So that means that we have many opportunities to give to others, many opportunities to be kind to others, many opportunities to share what we have with others. So let's look for those opportunities and rejoice in them, delight in them, take advantage of those opportunities. So that's it for this sutta. So relatively short and straightforward discourse. Do we have any questions or comments at this time?
Thank you, Bante. We'll wait for the questions to appear if people have them. And in the meanwhile, we can say hello to some of our friends. Hi, Kyle, Ella, Cam, Maria, Marielle, Tin, Claudia, Michelle, Ryan, and Sarah. So great to see you morning and evening. This is really lovely. So there are no questions as of now, but they might appear. The resident question.
Yeah.
One thing I that he has something to give something valuable.
Then give things that aren't valuable.
Maybe you can repeat the question so if people
Oh,
heard
she asked, what should we do if we find that we don't have anything valuable to give to others? And in that case, I would say look more closely. See, do you actually have anything to give? Anything that you don't need that you could give to another? And the answer is almost invariably yes. We almost always have more than we need. We almost always have things that we can give and share. We just don't want to because we're attached to the things that we have. We don't want to let go of them. Usually that's the problem. The problem is not a lack of things to give. The problem is that we don't want to. We don't want to give. We don't want to let go of what we have. But in that case, look for other ways to give. Give time. So help other people out with what they're doing. Give attention. So pay attention to other people. Even when you want to go off and do something else, be there for others. So there's other ways to give rather than just giving physical things. But the truth is that most of us, we have more than we need. So if we think we don't have anything to give to others, that's usually not true. I mean, if you're living in terrible poverty, then that's a different situation. Sometimes you actually don't have anything to give. But the Buddha in the suttas, he said that if at one point he's talking to a group of people, and he says, if you understood the value of generosity as I do, then when you would not eat even a single bite of food without giving some of it to somebody else. So this really emphasizes the importance that the Buddha placed on generosity. Also in the suttas, it says that we should be willing to share what we have with our companions, even the contents of our own bowl. So even to the point of looking, and so this is really relevant in monastic life because you get a bowl of food and that's all you have for the day. And usually it's just enough. So then if you give some of it to somebody else, well, that's actually a sacrifice. You're actually giving up a little bit in order to share it with others. And you don't really have anything. If you're following the monastic life in the old style, you don't really have very much except your absolute basics. But even your absolute basics, you should be willing to share with others. This is what the Buddha is saying. So it's looking at that. It's looking at the stingy mind, the withholding mind, the mind which is not willing to give and share what we have. And recognizing how uncomfortable it is, how unpleasant it is to be caught in stinginess. It's really, really uncomfortable. The mind is like, oh, I don't want to give anything. No, it's mine. No, I not share. No, really unpleasant. But then when we give something to somebody else, it's like, oh, that feels nice. And then we realize that we actually we're not bothered by not having what we gave away because instead of the object, instead we have the joy of knowing that we did something kind for somebody else. But yeah, there are sometimes a situation where you really don't have anything to give. And in that case, be kind. Give kindness, give attention, give time, give effort. See what you can do to be helpful to others. But those cases are rare. Um, Again, unless you're in total abject poverty, you probably do have something that you can share with others. Sometimes it's your knowledge. You can share what you know with others. Um, yeah, find ways. Be creative. Be creative with generosity. Find ways to be helpful. You're pretty good at this already, to be honest. I don't think you have too much to worry about.
And Mehmet says, thank you, Bante. I understand that helping oneself is helping others, and helping others is helping oneself. How does one prioritize and balance if they contradict with each other in a situation, and helping others is actually harming oneself? With that context, is it praiseworthy that one focuses on his own well being and spiritual self development by disconnecting with others while they're suffering, although one could help them?
Yeah, you have to make a judgment call. Make a judgment call, but think twice. Because usually our habit is going to be some kind of self centered habit. So, usually our tendency will be either hoarding for ourselves, or it will be martyrdom, sacrificing ourselves. And neither attitude is correct. So, when we're practicing correctly, benefiting ourselves and benefiting others are not in conflict. When we're practicing correctly, benefiting ourselves and benefiting others are not two separate things. They flow together. They're unified. They're not separable. So if they seem to be in opposition to each other, it's because we're not practicing correctly. Because we don't yet understand what it is to benefit others, to benefit ourselves, and to benefit both. So I'd look more closely at it. In a situation where we think that benefiting others will harm ourselves, well, what is it that we're doing? What is the attitude that we're taking to the situation? Is there another way of approaching the situation which is of benefit to both ourselves and others, which is not harmful to either one, and which also doesn't neglect others? Because one of the big dangers here is that we can very easily slip into selfishness of like, oh, well, if I help others, then I won't have time for myself. So I'm just not going to help others. Well, that arises from the mind which thinks that helping others is not practice. But actually, helping others is part of our practice. Helping others is cultivating the wholesome mind which leads towards awakening. So looking at that. But there are admittedly sometimes situations where it actually is genuinely harmful to ourselves, and where maybe the benefit that we think we're bringing to others is really not that significant. And that's where we do need to be careful. But again, usually that's not the case. Usually we're just avoiding benefiting others because we're selfish. It's usually not the case that benefiting others genuinely harms ourselves. Usually we just don't want to do it because we're stingy and selfish. So look carefully at your motives here. Look carefully at your judgment. Okay?
And Jen's related to this topic says, a sutta that has helped me understand how to help others through taking care of ourselves is Samyutta Nikaya 4719, the Siddhaka Sutta, the acrobat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the sutta that I was quoting when I said, when we help ourselves, we help others. When we help others, we help ourselves. So there the Buddha is indicating that our practice is the unification of helping oneself and helping others. The Buddha says this, again, in many places over and over throughout the suttas. But the Simile of the Acrobats is one where he puts it in a very poetic way. So yeah, that's a great sutta. Thank you for referencing it.
And Susanna is saying, when you feel like you have no more to give, where do you get more? And she means the more intangible things like love, attention, time, etc.
Produce them within yourself. So this is where meditation practice is really, really, really important. If you feel like you don't have enough love to give, it's because you're not producing enough within yourself. So sit down and do some loving kindness meditation. And you'll find that the more loving kindness meditation that you do, the more you become overflowing with love, which means the more you have to share with others. The easier it is to love others, to give attention and care and kindness to others.
And John is asking, do the more obscure rules of the Vinaya result from the Buddha not wanting monks to causing unwholesome mind states in people outside the Sangha?
So there's different kinds of Vinaya rules. So some Vinaya rules, especially the major ones, are moral things, not killing and not stealing and so on. Some of them are practices of self-restraint that help the monastics to develop renunciation and contentment. Some of them are about not being burdensome to the lay people, so not being too much of a burden on the people who support us. And some of them are about making the monastic community look good in the eyes of the public. And so the last category in particular is, to some extent, it is culturally dependent upon ancient India. So some of the things which in ancient India were looked upon poorly and therefore led to the formation of Vinaya rules are not really relevant to modern day situations in other countries. But the other three categories of rules still hold pretty well, especially the first two categories, they hold pretty well. So coming back to your question, can you say the question again so I make sure I'm addressing it completely?
I don't remember anymore. Which one?
John's question.
Oh, John's question. Do the more obscure rules of the Vinaya result from the Buddha not wanting monks to causing unwholesome mind states in people outside the Sangha?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that does apply in the case of some rules. So some rules are about exactly that, like not wanting the lay community and the general public, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist, by the way. Some of the rules are about non-Buddhist people with non-Buddhist beliefs who then would criticize some of the practices, some of the activities that the Buddhist monks were doing. So yeah, that does apply. Some of the Vinaya rules have nothing whatsoever to do with Buddhist practice per se, but they're about helping prevent other people from having a low opinion of the Buddhist monastics.
All right, thank you, Bhante. And Kam says, thank you. Bhante, I found that it is helpful to understand this discourse more when linking with practicing the 10 parapitas. And Edith says, thank you for these sutta studies. To me, reading the suttas are for some reason boring. But this way I can go over some of them with you, and I even have explanation for it. It is wonderful. Sadhu, sadhu. Yes, we're all grateful for Bhante. And she also asks, I feel like letting others help me with certain things are sometimes hard to accept. Some advice on this mind state?
Yeah, recognize that allowing others to help you is an act of kindness to them, because you're allowing them to cultivate goodness. You're allowing them to cultivate generosity and helpfulness. which makes them happy. So allowing others to help you makes them happy. So do it as an act of kindness to that person. Do it knowing that by helping you, the other person will be happy and they will be generating good karma, which will lead to their long-term benefit. So letting others help you is an act of kindness to that person. So you both win. It's a win-win situation.
Sadhu. All right. Well, that was the last question, I believe. There is nothing else.
Okay.
Actually, Namet has, thank you, maybe out of context. What do the words spirit and spiritual point to within Buddhist context?
Mm, so in the text themselves, we don't really find words which you can translate directly as spiritual. So those are words that I use when speaking in English because it helps to clarify that what we're talking about is not the material acquisition of physical things, but rather that we're cultivating qualities which lead towards awakening, which lead towards enlightenment. So that's more what I'm talking about. So spiritual practice then is practice which cultivates wholesome mental qualities, as opposed to physical practice, which is things which cultivates your body in various ways. So instead, Buddhism is about cultivating the mind and the heart. It's about cultivating wholesome qualities of mind and heart, which lead towards perfect wisdom and compassion, which lead towards full enlightenment. So that's what I mean by spiritual. Okay.
All right, great. I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And John is asking, got any cats? Not today. Gotta keep tuning in. And one day he'll appear. Or maybe not. Maybe there will be a chicken.
Maybe both.
Maybe both, yeah. And Ella says, those stories are very helpful to understand how we can practice in everyday life. Thank you so much. Yes, true, true, true. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us this morning. As mentioned, we meet every morning at 8 a.m. So from Monday to Friday, there's always Sutta study. And in the weekends, there's other things. So this weekend, we will be having a weekend meditation retreat. So with Bhante Sudaso. So he will be leading us through the 6 elements meditation. So that is what we will be exploring throughout the weekend. So there will be our usual Monday morning meeting at 8 a.m., evening meeting at 7:30 p.m. But there will also be a couple of other special meetings during the day where we will be both practicing meditation, listening to Dhamma talks, checking in with our meditation practice with Bhante, who will give us pointers and whatnot. But we will also be chanting the Ratana Sutta at 6 p.m. on both Saturday and Sunday. So even if you're not, quote unquote, attending the retreat online from the comfort of your home, you can join in for the chanting if you like. So hope to see you this evening at 7:30. There will be metta meditation as usual, followed by Dharma talk and discussion. And then tomorrow morning we'll start with the retreat, so the weekend retreat. So hope to practice with all of you this weekend. All right. Thank you so much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.